Happy Thursday afternoon, everyone. I almost forgot what day it was again. Unbelievable. Uh, Thursday afternoon here. I think it's probably going to be Thursday evening where Stephanie's at.
Yeah, it's just gone 7 here.
Well, it's definitely evening over there.
It'll be dark. Almost dark as well. Yeah,
Oh,
I've got the lights on.
there we go.
Yeah.
Now, I have to say, we are probably going to be changing some of our stuff around for the intro for this show because we're using the intro for one intro for both our shows, and that's going to be changing before long. But I do want to welcome Stephanie to the show, The Con-Versation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about her and her works. So, Stephanie, what genre would you say that you write in?
Generally, it's dark fiction. I used to say, I write horror, but sometimes it can still be horror, but just because it's dark, it's just the elements of it that affect the emotions. And I think if you say you're horror, it ties you a little bit too much. So for me, I personally would say that I write dark fiction. Sometimes it is more explicit horror, but not extreme. And then I also write dark poetry as well, but it's rather a strange way of coming to it because I was never really a horror reader as such or a fan of horror films. I mean, I've been a reader most of my life, and I would read dark fiction, but in terms of more literary works that were dark, I have said before that Dickens is actually one of my favourite novelists, and there is darkness in there, the sort of darkness of humanity. And it was only sort of late teens, early 20s that I discovered Stephen King's books and read those. But it's anything with an edge. So you will never find me reading chick lit or even writing it unless it's under an assumed name, but something that will bring a little chill into people's lives. And as I say, I started writing, I'd say about 10 years ago. I was writing poetry and verses before then, things that I would call rhymes. But again, it wasn't really horror until I saw, it's strange, I saw a call for stories about potatoes. It had to have a theme. The theme was something to do with potatoes, and it was a horror call, my first ever one that I saw in Writing Magazine. And I thought, I'll try that. And I wrote it. It's called Death is Not a Potato. And it was dark, but it wasn't horror because I hadn't learned at that point. But the editor, Teresa Derwin, she got in touch and she said, yeah, it's not quite there, but send other things. And so I started looking around and I found this horror community that I didn't realise existed. And I found Horror Tree with all these calls there. And I thought, oh, I could do that. And I thought, I'll have a go. And I started writing these stories and I just found it such fun. It wasn't necessarily to scare people, but to have fun myself by seeing how bad people could behave and how you could show up maybe the worst side of some people and let them get their comeuppance. I think a lot of it is a reaction to seeing people around you doing bad things in the world and they seem to get away with it. If you've got a horror story, you can bring in some of those characters, your loan sharks or the people who think they deserve everything, and you can put them in a situation and give them a taste of their own medicine. And I really like that about the dark side.
There we go. Now, with you saying dark fiction and horror, what would you say the difference would be between the two? Would you say like suspense level or?
I think when people talk about horror, the expectation seems to be that something's got to scare you or frighten the life out of you, and there is that expectation of the slasher element a bit as well. Whereas what I call dark fiction is really a quiet sort of horror. The things that can scare you, that can frighten you, but it's not blood and gore. When I think of horror, and it's probably the wrong way to think about it, but I do think of those elements of gore, of fear, and just lots of action scenes. Whereas I think the dark fiction, it gets inside a person's head a bit more. It's really hard to explain, but I prefer, say, the quieter side. I mean, I do have what I call an element of slice and dice in some of my stories, but I don't want them to be that sort of tale. Yet when people pick one up, they'll say, "Oh, where's the horror in it?" Not realizing that a person's psychological state might be the horror, or the fears that they have of something happening might be the horror. It differs for different people as to what is horror and what is dark, but it's very much, I think, more of the psyche, the person, than events as such.
Now, what got you started with all this? Did you see, was it like a contest or was it?
Well, there was that story called, so I say, some years back that I saw, and that got me on the short stories. But there was a contest. Oh, it'll be about I'll say 5 years ago, but I think time has a habit of going quicker than I remember. And there was a story contest in The Guardian, and it was for short stories based on Stephen King's, is it the shop or the bag of needful things, something like that. I can't remember, but it was about, you had to write a short story on cursed objects. So I did one and sent it away, and it never got anywhere. And I looked at it and it came, I thought that could be a short, a longer story. And that evolved into a novella, which is out with Brigids Press, and that's bottled. And that has beetles in it because Stephen King seems to like to put beetles in his stories. And that helped me realize that I could write the longer work. So it was a competition that got me onto the longer side of things. But I found that by writing a short story, if you get an idea and you work it through as a short story, it's a way of working out if you've got a novel or something else. You can work the idea through. And I think there's 2 or 3 longer works now that have developed from short stories. So if somebody's trying to or have thought of an idea for a novel and they're not quite sure how to approach it, they could take an element of it, write it as a short story, and then go back to it later and see how it could evolve. But it's a good way of working through ideas as in the short form, and it's something that I still do occasionally. I got a novella out with Brigids Press. They were out with another publisher which closed its doors earlier this year, and Brigids stepped in and picked up my old books, and they're putting out some new ones. And I had a short story, and it was called Locked In, Locked Out. And it's because I'd read in the paper about locked in syndrome, where you have people in hospital and they are conscious of everything, but there's no response. You can't get a response, although in a lot of cases they can blink their eyelids to communicate. And I thought that would be such an awful position to be in. And so I wrote the short story, and I turned it into the novella Pause, because I thought, what if something happened to everybody? You were going about your daily business, like if you're walking your dog and then suddenly you froze, and your mind, you were completely aware of everything around you. You could see, you could hear, you could feel the rain on your face, but you couldn't move. And then if that started to happen to other people around you, it's not necessarily a virus. I'm not giving any spoilers. So it may be a virus. It may be something else. Something else is more likely. But it's if you're walking on the beach and the tide was out and then you froze, the tide comes back in. You can't do anything about it. Or if you're crossing the railway tracks and you freeze, things like that. It just seems such a horrible thing to happen. So I turned that short story, hadn't quite worked as a short story, but I felt I had a good idea, and turned that into a novella, which I still really liked. And I think there's a scene in there that is, a few scenes in there that are quite good. But there was also an aspect in there of seeing how society behaves, because I think these days, if you go out and about, something's happening, people don't always step in to help. You see them filming it and uploading it rather than reacting and helping out, at the time. And in this particular book, where things happen, you see others taking advantage. And it's a way of questioning, would you be the person who took advantage, or would you be the person who would help? There's a lot of what would you do within that. And I think we all like to think that we would behave in certain ways. I mean, the medical team that are researching the issue, they're given the option of staying to help, find a cure, or to go home and stay with their family just in case they freeze. Where would they want to be? And so some go and some stay. So what would you do for common good? Would you be a coward? Would you be brave? It's hard for any of us to know, really. I think we all like to say, oh, we do this, but then when you're faced with it, would you? It's one of those things.
That actually gives me chills. All shook up over that one.
It's a quick read. It's a short, it's a novella, but I like it. I mean, when I first started writing, I could read back over my stories and I could see where they didn't quite work or where it needed tightening. I think, yeah, they're okay. And then I improved, and now I've got enough confidence in my own writing that I know some people won't like it because it's subjective. So I try not to take offense if someone says, oh, I really didn't like that. It's just one of those things. A lot of us don't like some of the big names. I've never read James Joyce's Ulysses. Everyone goes on about it being a classic, but I haven't got past page 1. And there's other big names that people hate. So I know it's not for everyone, but now what I have written, I do like. And so I would say if people want to, that one is quite a scary one because it could possibly happen. Have a read and then be thankful at the end that it didn't happen.
Well, one question that I always ask is what would you say your inspiration was that got you started into writing?
Oh, that's hard. I have always been a reader. The writing has only come on in recent years. I'd say when my kids were younger, I would write verse, but not much else because I was working full time as well. I did have a career break for a while, but then I went back into work. And with a lot of women, when you're working full time, you've got a family, there is so little left for yourself. But when I did eventually go back to work, I was a part-time librarian in a junior school, and I saw all these books and I started to read them for the kids. And I thought, oh, I could write that. And then I moved to secondary school, which is 11 to 16-year-olds in this country. And I was a librarian and a teaching assistant there, and I did a lot of literacy work. And I was reading books there. I thought, yeah, I could do that. And I started to write and have a go. And as soon as you start to write your own words, it just takes you further on that journey. I think one book is my favorite of all time. It's Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, and his use of language is wonderful. It's so poetical and dark, and I would say he is one of my inspirations, both in poetry and in some of my writing. I mean, that sort of writing wouldn't work in the prose novella, but I can get a little bit poetical, if you like in my folk horrors. I can bring that element into it there. But it was a long time coming as far as the writing goes. And I would say to any women or any men even who are older, I will say here, I'm 58 years old, getting older, that it's never too late. I still look online at times and see all these other writers, and I see where are the faces like mine, who, those who are grayer and a bit more worn around the edges, and you don't see them. And then I did a tweet earlier this year, and I said, let me know if you're an older writer, especially the women, and they'd let me know. And I've picked up a few books of theirs to read and told them where to find me at Horrortree if they want me to put books up on the indie bookshelves that I do there. And it's just that, as I say, I think people think it's too late, but it's not too late. And that's partly why I do mention my age every so often, just so that other people know that they are, that there is a path for them to follow and they can find success. And there's only other one thing, it's a bit of a grim thing actually recently, but people have talked about simultaneous submissions and whether you should do it or not, because you're left waiting for ages for a response. And I've been thinking in the past year or so, and it was a bit morbid, that you send a book out and it can be waiting for about a year or so before you hear. And I was projecting ahead, saying, well, I haven't got that long left, not where I'm mentally capable anyway. So simultaneous submissions, I will pay a little bit of attention to, but I don't always. And I remember Tim Wagner was talking about it on a podcast that I was on, and he was saying he doesn't pay any attention to them. So I think it's easier with short stories, to obey the rules. But I think as you get older, you can sort of swing it a little bit. And you could even say in a way that those sort of rules are ageist, because it means that you could, you haven't got the same time as the younger people. I think writing should be for everyone, but they need to take into account older needs. The grave is calling.
Now.
I live next to a cemetery at the moment.
Yeah. Now we know where the darkness comes from. It's from across the.
Yeah, it's a view from the bedroom. It's the graveyard. But we are moving soon, so that goes. But yeah, but they've been very quiet. There's been no disturbances there. It's very peaceful.
No pun intended, but I bet it's dead quiet out there.
It is. It's deadly. It's deadly.
Now, where can people find your works at?
I would say go to brigidsgatepress.com and they will have my books there, and then they have all the links to buy those books. So if it's Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever, they have all the little links on the particular books there. I do mention them on my website, which is www.stephanieellis.org. I hope I got that right, because I get that wrong all the time. I always get the endings wrong and put .com and it's .org, and then I don't exist when I type myself in. But I'd say Brigidsgate is the place to go.
Okay. Well, I did put your website up there.
Yeah.
Just so people can see it. And you're also in some anthologies. Are those anthologies also on your website?
On my particular website, everything I've done from the year dot is there. You will see nice, pretty covers where the links have probably gone because those things aren't published anymore. But it has anthologies. I mean, I've been in Flame Tree Press, Dying Planet anthology, Midnight in the Pentagram, and quite a number of them. I think the one that I was in this year is A Quiet Apocalypse, which have people like Kev Harrison, me, John Palasano. It was Dave Jeffries' world that he'd written a series in, and then he invited others to do an anthology where we would write stories set in his world. And that's just got me thinking that I've created my folk horror world in 5 turns and Reborn, and I could perhaps maybe ask Brigidsgate if they'd like to do an anthology and invite people into my world.
They might, you never know.
The Wicker Man Revisited.
Are there any words of wisdom that you'd like to give to somebody who's just starting writing, or who might be on the verge of sending it to a publisher, or might be scared to?
Don't be scared. I think that is one of the biggest steps for any writer. I did I was at Horror Trees. They do online zine, Trembling with Fear. It's a weekly thing. And I did it for 5 years. And it's jabbles and flash fiction, slightly longer stories for the specials. I mean, I'm still there in other capacities, but I stopped that this year to give myself more time for writing. But it was a place where you would get experienced writers, but it was a lot of new writers as well. So when they sent it in, and they would be very apologetic, almost saying, sorry, I haven't got a publishing history, sorry, I'm new. I would send things in. Don't say you're sorry. Don't call yourself an aspiring writer, because if you've written, you are a writer. And just send it. The editors and people who read it are a lot kinder than you think. And one of the things that I prided myself on at the time was that we helped first-time writers get out and be published. And even if it didn't quite make it, I would try and give a little bit of advice. I would say research your market carefully, so that where you're sending to actually wants a style of horror, of story that you have written, because sometimes you would get stories sent to us that weren't horror. It doesn't have to be horror. It had to be dark, because it's very much speculative fiction. I'll say now, that's one thing for Stuart anyway. That's one thing he regrets, is naming the site the Horror Tree, because it's speculative fiction. So if you've got fantasy, horror, or sci-fi, or a mashup of those, you send in that sort of thing. So it is varied. So research your market, read it through, edit it as much as you can, make sure there's no spelling mistakes, maybe get somebody else to read it, and then send it in. And just wait, don't immediately chase it up. If you're going to send it in, have a little bit of an intro and say, what you've got and what you've attached, because I've received things in the past where it would just be an attachment. So I don't know who sent it or how to respond to that person. Mm-hmm. And if you say, I haven't got any publishing credits, that doesn't matter. We all started like that. You can just say who your favourite authors are, or your films. Mention your cat, yes, but don't be the mad cat person, because everybody talks about their cats for some reason. I don't know why, but it's always cats, occasionally dogs. But yeah, just go for it. And then, because once you started, just keep sending them out and develop a thick skin, because you will never get over rejection completely. It will hit you every time, no matter how often you've had acceptances. You will still have those down moments. I have them every year. There'll be what I call a sort of fallow period, partly because I'm just waiting on, you've sent a load out and you're waiting, and then they come back and it's rejection, rejection, rejection. And you dwell on it and you think, what do I have to do? But then you look and see what you have done and remind yourself of that. I mean, I've had some short stories rejected this year, and they were lovely rejections, but I allowed that to get to me. And I forget that, I've got a book coming out, or I've got this coming up. And I'm saying all these words that other people should listen to, and I should listen to them too. We don't listen to ourselves often enough. So keep writing, keep going, even if you get rejected. Occasionally take a breather if you get a bit depressed. I'm around on Twitter and various places, and I do read people's work occasionally as a beta reader if they want to send something to me. I take part in the HWA mentorship programs. I've been mentoring a few people now and trying to sort of encourage them through what they're doing. I think we're working on a novel at the moment, but look at mentorship schemes, join places like the HWA, or find little communities online, build up your support network that way. So I'm quite approachable, and if I can't help, I can point people to somebody who can, so, and don't feel isolated either, because I know a lot of writers write and their family doesn't necessarily, they support them, they don't necessarily read their work or support them that way. So find other writers who might be able to read, or just be your sounding board. I've got a friend, Alison Fay, she's a writer, and we actually met via Trembling with Fear. She would send in drabbles and I started publishing those. Then we got to talk to each other. We meet up in real life at conventions, and she came to visit us the other day. Actually, it's a few weeks back now. I said time flies. But she's somebody that I can say anything to, things that you probably won't want to get out in public, but it's venting. You need to have somewhere to vent, and you boost each other up. So when I'm down, she'll boost me, and when she's down, I'll boost her. And she's a very good writer, by the way. She's got a few Gothic novelettes and things out at the moment, so look her up as well. But find your people and go to conventions and approach them if you can. I think in America you have more than we do. We only have a few over here, but if you can get to them, go to them, work up the nerve to speak to other people. Again, it can be daunting, but it makes it real. It makes it feel like a proper job in a way, whereas when you're typing at home, it doesn't quite feel real, but it is a valid career path, and one that's enjoyable most of the time when you're not being rejected.
I know a few months ago, y'all had Dublin Comic Con, which is right across from y'all. So we actually had them on our show. So Yeah, y'all do have a few out there, believe it or not.
Yeah, we went to there used to be Edgelit in Derby, which stopped, but then I think it's coming back next year. And I started going to those. I went as someone to just listen to everybody else. And I remember Ali, she was there. She says, "Oh, you'll be up on the stage one day." And I was going, "No, I won't do that." And then there was the UK Ghost Festival last year, and I was invited to a panel, and I thought, "Oh, I can't do that," but I did. I went on there and I did. And this is a tip: if you get invited onto a panel, you can take notes. I went on there thinking you had to sort of know everything and remember everything, so I was memorizing my notes. And I go along and I sit there next to the other authors, and then they all get out their bits of paper. Are you allowed to do that? And so when we did ChillerCon, which was supposed to be the first UK StokerCon, but that got moved because of COVID. It actually became ChillerCon in the end, and I went to that this year in May, and I did a couple of panels on there as well. And it was nice just talking to people. So go to these shows, talk to people when you can, and if I'm around, feel free to just come up and say hello. There might be a few minutes silence at the start while we work out how to talk to each other, because authors are terrible. But yeah, it's good. It makes it real and brings it to life, and you meet a lot of people in exactly the same boat, and they will all be encouraging and helpful. And it is quite a nice community when you get away from the stuff that can sometimes happen on social media. When you're removed from that and you're in the real world, you see the people, and it makes you feel like you're at home.
Definitely. Well, I do want to thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to let everybody know tonight at 6 p.m., the Con Hour, we are having 11-year-old actress Joni Shandor. She's been in a few horror films. She actually has a Christmas movie coming out. And she actually even has a podcast. So that's one show you're not going to want to miss. So everyone, until later this evening,